the Russian population, against what he says is genocide of Russian population in Ukraine, and that is to bring these areas into sort of Russian orbit and under Russian protection. So that has been his official line.
All right, Mary Ilushino reporting for us. Mary, thank you very much. For more on this, I'm joined now by John Herbst. He's the former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. John is also senior director of the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center. Ambassador, thanks very much for being with us. What is your reaction to what we are seeing take place now, to what Mary just laid out about President Putin's posture now when it comes to Ukraine, and what we've actually now heard from our CBS News teams on the ground in Ukraine, that in fact military action is underway?
This is a grave act of major aggression. A major power is attacking another power, peaceful power, to ensure that the major power, Russia, can dictate the policies of this country. This will mean minimum tens of thousands of civilian casualties in Ukraine, and it's a great threat to peace and stability throughout Europe.
And at this point, we have heard about sanctions. We have seen the United States and other Western nations continue to talk about escalating sanctions, but none of that has seemed to make any bit of difference to President Putin, who has now gone ahead with this Russian military action. What is your sense of the actual leverage that the United States, that Western nations have in this kind of situation? You know, we saw the Europeans also talk about sanctions as well, but again, none of that has served to deter Vladimir Putin.
We have to accept the fact that our sanctions have not worked to prevent this major aggression. So we need to calibrate our policy to deal with it. And what that means is Biden promised even more punishing sanctions yesterday if Moscow escalated. Moscow has now escalated, so those sanctions are necessary. And they're necessary in order to truly weaken a major blow to the Russian economy, to weaken its military over time. Also, we promised to support Ukraine if Moscow sent its troops into Ukraine, if they began these airstrikes. We need to send more weapons to Ukraine. There are ways we can do this, obviously not by air, but there are other ways we can do this. And we have to make it as hard as possible for Moscow to impose its will by military means on Ukraine. I'm not in any way suggesting we send American troops to do this, but Ukraine is in the fight of its life. We have to help it in all ways possible, short of sending American soldiers to fight.
What do you think this current situation, what kind of message do you think this sends to U.S. adversaries around the world? And I'm thinking of, China and how it is that the United States is handling this crisis between Russia and Ukraine. What is that message, you think, that is being sent in the midst of this?
The Chinese will see this as American weakness, which increases the danger of China doing something with Taiwan as Russia is doing with Ukraine. That's why it's very important that we really lower the boom on Putin now with the toughest sanctions possible, which includes exclusion from the SWIFT system, sanctions on the Russian National Bank. And also, we need to make sure we establish a reliable supply line of weapons into Ukraine, so that Moscow's invading forces, face at least serious resistance from the Ukrainian people, who have said that they're going to fight for their sovereignty, they're going to fight for their freedom. Because Putin is extinguishing freedom in Ukraine right now.
The New York Times had reported that cryptocurrency and the existence of digital currency may in fact allow Russia to effectively work around any kind of stiffer sanctions that may be imposed. Mr. Ambassador, I don't know how much you're able to talk about that, but I'm curious, if Russia is, for instance, developing its own digital currency, does not need to, in fact, engage in the global financial system, which is reliant on, the United States dollar, then how effective can increased sanctions potentially be if you have a new currency rising?
Well, it's possible that cryptocurrency might provide an alternative to the international financial payment systems, which all run through the United States. That may be true, I don't know, 10 years from now, 5 years from now. I'm not an expert on this. It's certainly not true today. And the Chinese cannot make up for what we do if, in fact, we were to do this to the Kremlin right now. But we need to make, to the extent we can, we need to cripple the Russian economy. As Moscow launches major war in Ukraine, we need to cripple the Russian economy. The Biden administration, I think, did a credible job, but sadly, an unsuccessful job to deter this major invasion. So they need to take steps now to make it extremely difficult, if not impossible, for Putin to succeed.
And you are expecting, or what do you think needs to be said when President Biden, in fact, speaks on this as he's scheduled to on Thursday?
We will, I mean, what he says is much less important than what he does. And again, he promised even more punishing sanctions yesterday. He needs to make good on that promise. And I outlined 2 steps that he could take that would make good on that promise. He also promised, we promised to help support Ukrainians in a partisan war against Russian invaders. We need to make good on that promise. Putin is now, again, he's launched the beast of war in Europe in a major fashion. We have to make him pay because he has said that his objectives go well beyond Ukraine. He wants to impose his will on all the states that used to make up the Soviet Union, all the states that used to make up the Warsaw Pact. These are now our NATO allies whom we must defend with our troops. So let's make sure Putin has as hard a time as he possibly can in Ukraine. The Russian people don't support this war. Russian casualties will be a political problem for Putin, and a sharply declining Russian economy will also be a major political problem for Putin. This is what we must do.
Ambassador John Herbst, Ambassador, I know it's a busy time. Thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
We are going to take a quick break. Much more news ahead. You're streaming CBS News.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
The mayor, the city council, everything's run by a woman.
Pine Lake is predominantly white, but the surrounding area is 90% black. Somebody's going to get pulled over.
Why are most of the people in the courtroom black? Most of the people in Pine Lake are white.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
Some Republicans are now accusing companies like Twitter and Facebook of targeting conservatives.
They've had unchecked power to censor.
I do not have access to my main Facebook account.
I wasn't given an explanation. I was just like, what did I do?
It's not okay to shut down my voice simply because it's not the same as yours.
How those rules are enforced is something that the rest of us know very, very little about.
The First Amendment protects all of us from the government limiting our speech. The companies have the ability to decide what speech they will allow. They're not the government.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
There is now more than $1.7 trillion in student loan debt.
The punishing price of a college education.
Why are we punishing millions of people because they chose to get an education?
My parents didn't make enough to just write a check and pay for school, and so loans were really my only option.
It just feels like quicksand. It feels like this huge thing I'll never get out from under.
This would be a moment for the federal government to say it is time for us not only to ask for forgiveness, but to extend forgiveness.
There's a cost to forgiveness. Ultimately, taxpayers are responsible for the federal debt.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
The mayor, the city council, everything's run by a woman.
Pine Lake is predominantly white, but the surrounding area is 90% black. Somebody's going to get pulled over.
Why are most of the people in the courtroom black? Most of the people in Pine Lake are white.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
I genuinely love the process of manipulating people online for money.
One man with total control of billions of people's stolen data.
Creating lies, denying truths.
Swap a face, make a face, change a voice. Now you have this very powerful machinery for creating synthetic media.
As new technology makes any video content possible.
I saw images of me taken from my social media and posted on these pornographic sites. It was completely horrifying.
How do we distinguish fact from fiction?
The technology has gotten so good that I think it's only a matter of time before deepfakes are used to influence an election.
What have you created?
A monster.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
The conflict between Russia and Ukraine is impacting energy prices here in the U.S. CBS News transportation correspondent Errol Barnett has more.
We are all likely to feel this in some way, shape or form. Fuel prices are steadily creeping higher, and there are several factors at play, including newly announced sanctions against Russia, but you also have high fuel demand in Europe and a limited global supply. All of that's pushing the price for a barrel of oil steadily toward $100, although it's not there just yet. Gas prices are continuing their upward march, with a gallon of regular now costing an average of $3.53. The cost of heating oil, that's also up. It's costing Americans 47% more now to warm up our homes with heating oil this winter than it did a year ago. Now keep in mind, Russia is a major exporter of oil and natural gas, selling 12% and 17% respectively of the global supply. So whatever the economic punishment Russia receives here in the coming days and weeks, it is likely going to put increasing pressure on the global supply chain, which we already know is quite fragile. Now, the Biden administration is trying to coordinate with major fuel producers and consumers to secure global energy supplies, and it has not ruled out eliminating the federal gas tax, but even those efforts are likely to have only an incremental impact. Errol Barnett, CBS News, Washington.
Sources tell CBS News President Biden has interviewed 3 Supreme Court candidates so far. The president reportedly met with Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, California Supreme Court Justice Leandra Kruger, and Judge J. Michelle Childs. The White House says Mr. Biden has not yet made a decision on his nominee, but a selection will be made by the end of this month. The nominee, once confirmed by the Senate, will replace Justice Stephen Breyer when he retires later this year. 2 Manhattan prosecutors investigating former President Trump and his business dealings have resigned. Carrie Dunn and Mark